Welcome to yet another episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. We talk on our podcast all the time about really, really cool career pathways for students, people coming out of high school, people coming out of technical college, community college, universities. We talk about going into industry. We talk about going into the military. We talk about apprenticeships and so on. One of the things that we haven't talked about much, which is actually an awesome career pathway and opportunity, is literally entrepreneurship right out of high school, right out of college, right out of a university, starting a company, being your own business owner. So this episode is all about students who want to do exactly that. We could think of nobody better to spend some time with us on this topic than Amber Busuttil Mullen. Amber is a partner at LA's Bowen law firm. She has worked with entrepreneurs all over the country, all over the world, knows what it takes to start up a company, to be successful in the world of entrepreneurship. And that is our topic for today. Amber, thanks so much for joining us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Sure, my pleasure.
So you have such an amazing, really awesome background, and I really want to introduce our audience to you by letting you give us a little bit of how you got to this position of partner at a boutique law firm doing really, really cool things.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks so much for having me on the show. Yes, I'm a lawyer and I specialize in the area of executive compensation, which is pretty niche. And my field deals with all types of ways that executives and specifically founders, entrepreneurs that we're talking about in this program, get paid. A lot of what people hire me to do is to figure out the issues that have to do with their stock ownership of a company, if they get stock options in a company, and specifically then further down the line, what happens to their ownership in the company when the company is sold or has some other sort of transaction, which is the goal, right?
Absolutely.
Get something lucrative out of your ownership and out of this company that you've started.
Exactly right. And believe it or not, this is actually a topic that really fascinates me. As you know, Amber, and as our audience knows, I spent a fair amount of time in the world of private equity and investment banking and so on, did several purchases and sales of companies. And people would be blown away by the different ways that we can find to compensate leaders within an organization. So many different implications from a tax standpoint in terms of what kind of behaviors we're incentivizing, how we want that value to flow to the individual that we're trying to reward, and so on. So it's a really, really fascinating space within the field of law. So we're looking forward to getting into some of those compensation issues at a high level here over the course of the podcast. Before we do that, tell us a little bit about your career pathway. Now, how did you first get into this kind of work?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, these compensation issues and the issues impacting ownership in a company are pretty multidisciplinary as far as the law is concerned. You already mentioned tax. That was my pathway. I love tax in law school. Surprisingly, a lot of law students really like tax. They take tax. Clearly, they don't all go into tax, but I did. And I started out, working in the early 2000s when I was a baby lawyer. And as it happened around that time, Matt, you'll well remember this, there was a huge upheaval in the corporate world with the collapse of Enron.
Mm-hmm.
And you might remember that CEO, Ken Lay, parachuted out with God knows how many millions of dollars, and stockholders were stockholding the bag. And around that time, there were a lot of legal and regulatory reforms, one of which was this brand new, quite complicated tax law that was meant to prevent that situation from happening again. And as the junior lawyer on the totem pole, I was basically the one who had to learn it. Some of the partners also learned it, but there were a few who were like, we're out. This is just too much of a change.
Is that Sarbox? Is that what you're referring to? Is that Sarbanes-Oxley?
That was in the securities world. I'm referring to, this is, don't put your listeners there to sleep because I'm going to make a legal citation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tax Code Section 409A. But any founders, any entrepreneurs who start a company and grow a company will clearly learn this term because it has to do with stock options, which is kind of the holy grail of being in the tech world at times. And speaking of stock options, right around the same time, the popularity of stock options and other forms of equity-based compensation that really, were started in Silicon Valley with the big tech giants, those started percolating out into other sectors of the economy, quite widespread, private companies. And I think those two things, like the new regulatory and tax landscape and just the trending of equity compensation, really solidified executive compensation. What I do is a discrete field. So I think the answer is it was kind of timing. I just was in this space when these, there was the confluence of these events, and I learned it.
Yeah, it's such a disruptive time in our world's economy. If I'm correct, was that like 2000, 2001, right in that era? Was that when all that was going
Just
on?
like 2002, 3, 4. Yep.
Got it. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
fall of Enron took Arthur Anderson Anderson at that time with it, and such a crazy time in our economy. Certainly, I mean we're going through crazy times today as well, but certainly there's a probably a little bit of a playbook from 20 years ago to how we
That's
navigate
right.
that, how
That's
we
right.
legislate around it, and how we continue to move ahead. And every time we sit down and talk about some of your experience, just the cool tech companies that you get an opportunity to work with. In some cases, household names. In a lot of cases, these really kind of niche companies that are doing really cool things in the world of technology. Just share with our audience, Amber, a little bit about some of the companies you've had the opportunity to work with in their technologies.
When you hear tech, I think a lot of people go straight to kind of software, robotics, engineering, medical devices. But as you know, there's really these days technology in so many different things. For me, the clients that I like are actually the ones that are a little bit more tangible, where I can understand what they're doing. For example, there's technology in cosmetics, in fragrances. There's chemistry, there's technology in clothing, there's technology in, all sorts of things that are maybe not your hardest technical fields. Those are the ones personally that are the most interesting for me because I could recognize them. And to be clear, so sometimes we represent these companies. Sometimes we represent investors investing into these companies. Sometimes we represent celebrities who are doing a endorsement for these companies. So there's a lot of ways that tech companies can cross my desk. I like it when I work on something I've never heard of it, and then I go out in the real world and lo and behold, there it is. So, I mean, I could say a couple names that you might have heard of. Halo Top Ice Cream, again, this food science. We did some work with Theragun, which is kind of they had some big athletes that were popularizing that product. We've done work for Skims, not a startup anymore, but I do a lot of work for Skims, this shapewear company. There's a lot of fabric technology and engineering that goes into their products. And then just other kind of fun stuff, personal favorite of mine because I drive a truck, lift kits for trucks. We had a wheel company that did all sorts of acquisitions of all sorts of automotive add-ons. So those are kind of some more, I would say, big tangible type products. And then, of course, there's all sorts of things that are components or niche, or it runs the gamut.
Absolutely. So it's everything from fabric to ice cream to massage products and everything in between. I think, one of the things I used to talk about, Amber, in my work in manufacturing was going from facility to facility and seeing how all these products were made. And it really didn't matter what space they were in. They were all doing fascinating things. So I think one message for our listeners, especially the younger ones, is that there's so many of these different career opportunities where you can see a wide span of different technologies, of different business models, of different business objectives, and so on. And so it's, as we're thinking about careers, as we're thinking about opportunities, really getting into something where you can see a lot of different aspects of business, a lot of different aspects of technology can make life even, in a job like mine, which was manufacturing, certainly in a job like yours, which is in executive compensation and so on. It's one of the fascinating things that we get to do is just see all these different aspects of business. None of these businesses get to where they are without somebody that has an entrepreneurial spirit. Somebody has to come up with an idea, see an opportunity in the marketplace. It doesn't necessarily have to be technology. Maybe it's a market that isn't being addressed with an existing technology and so on. But none of that happens without entrepreneurs. You get to spend so much time around so many of them. If you were to characterize or narrow down some of the traits that you think are common among the types of people that start up companies and are involved in entrepreneurship, what would you put on the list?
Ooh, that's so hard. As we know, all types of personalities can be successful. Anyone who's spent any time looking at Myers-Briggs, which for me is fascinating, you see these historic examples of all different mixes of, characteristics that have huge success in the world. I would say one that really impresses me, though, consistently, where I'm working with a founder and I'm like, gee whiz, this is a really cool characteristic, is not getting overly discouraged. Real startups, like I'm talking like two guys in a garage, they're not hiring me. They've come a little bit of, they've been through some hurdles by the time they get to me. But still, there's setbacks. You have a company that like desperately needs some money. They're about to close a financing round, and for whatever reason, an investor pulls out, or they're about to be sold. And we've been working on it for weeks and months and the deal goes sideways. Or you're selling to some behemoth company. You're selling to Apple. You're selling to Google. You can't negotiate anything. They're just like, nope, take it or leave it. And so these entrepreneurs, these founders, they have setbacks and they just ride it through. Like, that didn't work, on to the next thing. That didn't work, on to the next thing. Sometimes they ride it through, cool as a cucumber, like more than me. I'm like all frustrated on their behalf. And, they're just really persistent and they don't get overly discouraged, or at least they don't let it show.
Successful people are just people who stand up one more time than they fell down. Keep your chin up, recognize that things aren't going to go perfect. You can execute on your business plan to a T and still have outside influences that are going to affect which direction you need to pivot and so on. So having that ability to really maintain the tenacity in the face of challenges and struggles in running a business really, really important. So that's one piece of advice certainly for our young people is let's make sure that you're recognizing if you're getting into the world of entrepreneurship, not everybody becomes Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk overnight. In fact, those two didn't become Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk overnight. They had their share of challenges that they had to overcome. And I think another thing that's really important is just thinking about getting into the right startup. What is that high level perspective that they need to have as they're getting into the startup process?
Maybe a little bit cliche, but the two guys in a garage, with this idea and they're trying to do something, that is idea focused, that's product focused. I think ultimately what a founder needs to also think about is not only the specific product they're trying to develop or the specific technology that they're trying to work out, but how to make that a business. Because again, I understand we're talking about startups, but like fast forwarding, you want to sell it, you want to make some money off of it.
Right.
And so thinking about it as a business, you may not have an exact idea of who will buy it. By the way, there's someone out there who will buy pretty much anything. Like we said, there's really niche technologies that can be quite successful. But don't get so tunnel focused ultimately on what you're making. You have to step out of the lab. You have to step out of the hypothetical situation and you have to kind of have a big boy business. You have to think, this is the lawyer speaking, obviously, of all of the compliance that goes into it, because when someone buys the business, they're buying the whole thing.
Absolutely. So there's all those legal aspects. There's really kind of starting with the end in mind and understanding that we're going to have some goal. Most entrepreneurs, most founders aren't holding a business for their entire career. There's going to be some eventual transaction, and taking all that into account at the front end and making sure that you build the right foundation for your business is going to pay huge dividends in the back end, not just in terms of financial dividends, but in terms of how you can scale the business and in terms of the complications that you might avoid a little bit later on. I want to get into some of that in a little more detail. We've got so many listeners who are either teachers or students or maybe even people in the world of business that are interested in entrepreneurship, interested in founding a company. Maybe they're into robotics or they're into industrial control systems or they're into software. They're into some other technology. To your earlier point, that's, there's just so many different opportunities and so many great ideas. But let's say I'm one of these people with that idea. A lot of people aren't familiar with how you form an LLC or how you write bylaws or articles of incorporation or, the Department of Financial Institutions in my home state of Wisconsin that you deal with. These are all foreign terms, I'm sure, to a lot of our listeners. So if I'm a young person and I don't even know how I would go about starting a company, Amber, how would I do that?
Yeah, and I just want to say, to all your listeners out there who are young people, like take a deep breath.
Right.
It's not all totally burdensome. Like you should have some fun with your
For
creation and
sure.
your
Good
technology.
point. Yeah.
So, but you've already touched on a couple of things, Matt. I mean, the first step is, now we're talking about the nuts and bolts of really getting a company started. You need to form a company, an entity. That's typically going to be, an LLC or a corporation. The reality is, at the very early stages, founders often don't have the money to spend on a lawyer. So creating an LLC or forming a corporation, you can find some resources, on the internet, but you need to form an entity. You need to have an entity of some sort that's separate from yourself. You don't want to take on the liability of your business. You want that to be in an entity. The next step is going to be you put your IP in there. You contribute your IP, whatever it is that you've developed, into this entity. And then you have to do some of the formalities you talked about. You figure out what registrations are needed. You pay your filing fees. You send your, documents that show that that entity's been created. You send them to the state where the business is, and so on and so forth. And, you'll be able to find some checklists of this type of thing online now. As things get more complicated, maybe you're having some investors come in. Obviously, there gets to be some point where you really want a live human professional looking at that. But those are the basic initial steps that I just mentioned.
Just for our listeners, I mean, that process, and we just set up a separate company last week actually for a related business, and it's really not that complicated. I mean, you go, at least in my home state of Wisconsin, and every state is different. There's a website, it kind of walks you through, it asks you the questions, literally won't let you go on to the next page until you answer the questions you're required to answer. And so just to kind of maybe demystify the challenge a little bit for our listeners, it takes a little bit of work,
It's
but it's
doable.
yeah, it's totally doable, and it's way
Yep.
less complicated. Any other advice on structuring a company? You mentioned LLCs, limited liability companies, obviously some tax advantages from the flow through aspects. And again, not to get too taxy or too overly complicated, but is the LLC the right model in most cases for a startup?
You know what, Matt? There's not really a one size fits all. We do see a lot of LLCs. Basically, we see three things. We see LLCs, we see C corporations, the letter C for your listeners,
Mm-hmm.
corporations, and then S corporations, the letter S corporations. There are some tax advantages to LLCs and to S corporations that you don't get with a C corporation. On the flip side, there's some reasons you might want to use a C corporation if you're going to have a lot of people coming in. We're going to get probably to talking about stock options because it's a lot of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
If you planning on having a stock option program to help hire some employees, if you're going, it used to be that venture capital would only invest into C corps. That's maybe a little bit less true, but they still like it. So those are the three structures. And I think that, again, this is something where you could probably do some basic informing, get some information for yourself online, but at a minimum, do bring in a CPA to help you make that choice.
Certainly the financial and the tax implications of setting up an organization and recognizing how much money you can save yourself on the back end by thinking about some of these things on the front end, really important. So having a good CPA, and there again, I mean, it's not like you have to go to a big four firm right out of the blocks. There's all kinds of really great smaller CPA firms that can support an entrepreneur as they're thinking about how they want to form their business, and how they want to structure it, and how they want to track their financial performance, and obviously comply with the tax code and so on. All really important aspects of starting up a company. Anything else that you can think of that we haven't covered? If I'm a founder and I'm just at that startup phase, I haven't started operations yet, I'm just placing my IP in this entity that's going to protect my legal liability and set me up for success in the long term. Anything we're missing?
Well, set up a bank account for your company. So this goes to the point of just keeping yourself separate from your company. Don't be writing checks out of your personal account. You set up a new bank account, you deposit them into the business bank account. It's your capital contribution, as us, lawyers and finance people know. So I meant to mention bank account at the outset. I'd cap it with that.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I'm glad we gave you the opportunity to throw that in. Yep. Set that bank account up. And yeah, I think another observation is if you walk into a bank, they're going to have a personal banker that's familiar with business banking. They're going to have somebody that's going to walk you through this process. So there again, nothing to be intimidated by. It really isn't much different than setting up a bank account for yourself personally. Just some different aspects of the data and the information that the bank is going to need, but a pretty straightforward process. What might be a little less straightforward and take a little bit more time is the whole idea of capitalizing your business. A lot of entrepreneurs may put a nest egg in there. They may have some savings that they can use to fund the initial startup of the business. But if the idea is big enough, the opportunity is big enough, and their bank account is small enough that they need some outside capital, you've mentioned venture capital already. Tell us a little bit about what the different options are for who might invest in a startup company, and how we get to those people, and what that structure might look like.
Sure. So, there's kind of some buzzwords that are used in the industry, like friends and family is just that.
Mm-hmm.
You go to your friends, you go to your family, you hold your hat out. Angel investors are a little bit more formalized. Frequently, they work in groups, and I would say most, even medium-sized cities, even small cities, will have an angel investing group that you could find. Kind of circling back to the part of your audience that are students, use your teachers, use your professors and their
There you go.
networks. I have seen some businesses launched even in partnership with professor and students. This is maybe a little bit more at the grad level,
Mm-hmm.
but still, network. It's kind of old school, but I think that that's the way that you start to put your feelers out. If you're going a little bit more formalized route, like your company really has some legs, you can look to get into an incubator program. Venture capital is yet kind of a step above all of these, a little bit more formalized. I would say, again, because I want to make sure that this conversation is encouraging and not discouraging for anyone out there. Remember that investing is a two-way street. It's not just you holding your hat out. The investors are interested in finding you as well. If you have folks that are in this world where they invest in maybe small, new, high risk companies, they want to find you as well. So put the word out.
Absolutely. Put the word out, and then maybe we can do a little work on defining some of these terms. I mean, I certainly know what an angel investor is, and I'm sure a lot of our audience does, but some folks may not be familiar with that. So how would you define an angel investor? What is that individual or that organization?
Yeah, so maybe to distinguish that from friends and family, which is the other, like I said, buzzword that I just used, an angel investor takes a little bit more of a professional view on investing. A friend or a family is probably plunking their money in and just now you've got it and they're crossing their fingers for you. An angel investor is someone who is looking for these opportunities, who is probably someone with significant business experience with something to add. So there is typically and historically kind of a mentoring component that comes with angel investors. It used to be that they would like to take a fairly significant stake in the company so that they had some influence. Nowadays, angel investors frequently work in syndicates or in clubs. Like I said, they might all look together to kind of decide their investment decisions together, but it's just kind of like a little bit more step of sophistication, a little bit more hands-on. Venture is a quite formalized world again, historically associated with Silicon Valley. Now they're all over the place, but that's just yet one more step up the chain.
So the whole idea of friends and family. So I've got a parent, I've got a brother, a sister, an aunt, or an uncle that maybe has some net worth and is willing to kind of take a little bit of risk on me and on this great idea. And then that next step up is an angel investor. And I think one of the messages I want to make sure our audience is hearing, and it's to your earlier point, don't be intimidated by this. The truth of the matter is that an angel investor can be a huge benefit to a startup company, especially if they've got some subject matter expertise or experience in the specific market space. And in many cases, they will. And so these people are people that are going to be friendly to you. They're not going to be out trying to necessarily take advantage of you or take your company away from you. They want to be helpful to you. The other term you mentioned, which again is another one that's familiar to me, but maybe not all of our audience, is this whole idea of an incubator. So what does that feel like? What's an incubator?
Yeah, an incubator is an organization, and it's typically set up by people interested in early stage investing. Sometimes there's a physical location, and basically companies interview startups, founders, entrepreneurs interview. And if they're accepted into the incubator, sometimes they set up their office space there. They're together with other entrepreneurs. They're, percolating ideas between themselves. And then there's the incubator provides these early stage services. They might not only help give some ideas for how to develop the product, how to scale the product, how to market the technology, but they will help with some of these professional services, such as put you in touch with legal, put you in touch with accounting, and so on and so forth. It's almost like a little nest for you to be in where your business incubates. Oh, I should have mentioned, they also could put in some money too. But it's more full service and formalized than even an angel investor network who, yes, you have these folks there with the professional skills and the industry background. Incubator, is one more layer. You could actually have your business sort of there and headquartered there for some period of time until you launch out of the nest, just like what it sounds like.
It really does create that environment of support. And then to your point, they're not the only company that's sitting in that incubator. There's another 15 other companies that are there. So now you're sharing challenges and ideas with other entrepreneurs and getting feedback from them. It's a really, really cool environment. We could probably do an entire episode just on the investment model and on the opportunities to start up companies. I want to get into now, Amber, a little bit more of the formal structure of a relationship with an investor. So let's fast forward from friends and family. And let's say I've got an angel investor that's interested in making an investment and helping counsel the company to some degree. What does that agreement typically look like?
I think this conversation could be helpful just to sort of have some terms that your listeners, especially your younger listeners, can, jot down and go and look into a little more later. As I said, it used to be that angel investors would frequently like to take a large position in a company. Now, a really common structure for angel investors are what we call safes. That's a kind of security and a kind of arrangement by which angel investors can put money into a company. When an investor invests, the two parties typically decide on a valuation, and that tells you how much that investment is going to buy for the investor, how much ownership in your company they'll get. Well, with a really early stage company, it's a shot in the dark. Who knows how much it's worth? You're definitely not making any revenue, but you've got a product, you've got a great idea, and you could bog down a lot of time trying to, come to an agreement on a valuation. So this safe arrangement bypasses that. It allows you to get some money into the company quickly and more simply without agreeing on a valuation. It basically punts that decision to down the line. Again, for any, just to put the term out there and people can kind of look up a little bit more about it later, the legal documentation, talk about like trying to kind of remove hurdles. The legal documentation to do a safe investment is available online. We talked about incubators. This forum was started by Y Combinator, which is a well-known incubator. They have their forms online. I think there's like 2 different forms and that's it. And there's just not a lot of terms to negotiate. So if you're getting to that point where you're thinking about angel investors, you're getting in front of angel investors, you've got some people ready to put some money in potentially, you're going to want to think about safes.
Got it. So think about safes, go out. The documentation is readily available online and you can learn about that. And I'm actually going to do a little bit of studying of that after the podcast myself because I'm interested on the investor side, how that functions. But thanks for whetting our appetite on that and great advice for our young entrepreneurs as they think about capital structure. Now let's get into the growth stuff. I mean, we're all doing this with the goal of trying to grow the company, of taking this technology, taking this idea that somebody has and scaling that. So that becomes particularly challenging in a small company, right? Because you're wearing a lot of hats and you're trying to scale this business. Any tools or support that you can think of that our entrepreneurs should be aware of in terms of, all right, we've got the idea, we've got the capital structure, we've got some startup capital, and now we're going. What happens now?
There are a few things that I think keep coming up as themes in this conversation. One is to be resourceful. We've talked about angel investors. You have your investors who might have different skill sets. Another thing I think to keep in mind that is a great tool or a resource is you don't always have to hire people in full time. Almost anything can be outsourced these days. I mean, I think that's really obvious when it comes to coding and some of the hard technological stuff that people are used to outsourcing or are pretty familiar that they can be outsourced even to some places overseas. What is, I think, a little bit less obvious, but could be a great tool is you can outsource a CFO. You can get a CFO for hire. You don't have to have a full-time position in your budget for all of these people. So don't get intimidated. There are ways to bring in these skill sets and scale your business. Human resources, you can outsource some of that. You know what I mean? Don't feel like you have to have every single one of these people on your payroll, albeit you do need these areas focused on, as we've already talked about.
Absolutely. I think back to a company that we started up in the ed tech space going back about 8-9 years ago and how that business has scaled. And you're exactly right. I mean, early on, we're like, oh, we need somebody to kind of manage the office, but that's not a 40-hour-a-week job. We found somebody that could work 2 hours a day, that wanted to work 2 hours a day, had a family that they wanted to take care of, but also wanted that opportunity to work in the world of business. We had a retiree who ended up being the controller for that company and was fine with a 5 to 10 hour week. And so these people are out there. And honestly, in our case, just running ads in Indeed and seeing what comes back, it's a really, really efficient way to go out and find phenomenal people. So all kinds of opportunities from that standpoint. The other opportunities that we're looking at, and you mentioned this already as well, is we want to make sure that we're compensating our investors long term. We want to make sure that we're getting a return on the risk that we're taking as entrepreneurs. We're also going to have, as the company grows, this really awesome group of people that are helping to fuel our growth in the form of employees and so on. There's a lot of folks that want to get into the startup world that enjoy the energy and the excitement and the challenge and the risk that comes along with a startup, but they're also going to be asking the question of, WIFM, what's in it for me? If I take this ride with you, if I take the risk with you, how can I take that risk and maybe a lower salary in some cases that I'm accepting in response to this opportunity and turn that into an opportunity for significant, equities, significant capital return over time. So we know you spend tons and tons of time, Amber, in this world of stock options and other forms of capital appreciation compensation. So talk a little bit about that. What should I be thinking about as an entrepreneur in terms of stock options and so on?
Sure. And, you made me think of something for your students out there who may be listening. There's probably people who are like, this world sounds so interesting. I don't have that killer idea. You can be an entrepreneur without being the one who owns the IP, who's developed the technology. You are an entrepreneur if you get on board with one of these companies and you take some risk and you're, they're together from the beginning. This also, I think, ties into our last question. Gee, how do you scale the business if you don't have, tons and tons of money? Well, what we call it in the industry is sweat equity. You can compensate people for their sweat, their labor, their services, their work using not a money, not money, not a salary, but using an opportunity to have some ownership of the business. And we do that through, at the very, very, very early stages, stock, or a little bit later on, once the company has some more value, stock options. So again, going back to the cliche of the two guys in a garage, the company's just really, really, really getting off the ground. It's been formed. You've done the stuff we've talked about. You've made the entity. You've done your filings, and you have a company that has some shares of stock. What are they worth? Probably zero. Very little, because you haven't gotten your business off the ground yet. The hope is they will someday be worth a lot of money. You can compensate your early colleagues, your partners, your teammates, your employees, if you want to call them that, using the stock. At some point, the stock becomes too valuable because you can't just give it out and there's no consequences. Like if you give out stock, someone pays taxes on it just like they do on their salary. The problem is they don't have money to pay the taxes. So
Right.
in the very early stages, two guys in a garage, you can give out stock to your employees. Later on, what you would compensate with is stock options, which gives your employees the right to buy the stock in the future at a low price.
Awesome. And just for our audience and maybe for you, Amber, I'm a product of exactly the models that you're talking about. So the businesses that we have the opportunity to own now, all of that capital is the result of, in the first case, stock appreciation rights, then later stock options in the form of profits interest in an LLC. We don't have to go down that path, but a really, really cool way to compensate people in exactly the way that you're talking about, really tax efficient ways of creating wealth and creating value for employees. And maybe they're willing to take a little bit less money along the way in exchange for this huge opportunity. And in my case, it paid off really well in two cases, at least relatively speaking, and allowed us to do the things that we're doing now. So I'm a product of this model. I'm a huge fan of this model. The other thing that I'm really, really a huge fan of is then using that to scale the business. So let's talk a little bit on the back end. So I'm an individual who has in this case, a stock option, and I'm given that option at a specific value, so that I can avoid some of the tax consequences and other challenges that come along with just giving somebody common stock or preferred stock in an organization. And now that is starting to scale and grow. How do I monetize that over time? If I'm that individual, that person that wants to be in a startup, maybe not the person at the top of the food chain, but wants to be part of this process. How does that work for me in the long term? How does that value get returned to me?
Yeah, well, at the very beginning of this podcast, I was a little hesitant to jump to the very end because I think I said right
Right.
out the starting gate, the goal is to sell the company.
Right.
But it's pretty true. I mean, the goal is to sell the company. Frequently, employees hang on to those stock options until the company is sold. And at that point, basically, they get paid the difference between what their hopefully low exercise price is for the folks that came in at the beginning and we've taken the company to the moon, we've hit a home run, your exit price. The difference between those two gets paid out to the employee. Now, someone might decide that they don't want to wait to the end. They're ready to put their money where their mouth is. They really believe in this company, and they actually do what we call exercising the stock option. They pay in that low price. They acquire the stock and they hold the stock. And again, it's just another technique, but hopefully that stock appreciates. Then you still need to sell it though. In a privately held company, you still want to sell the stock because otherwise you're stuck holding the stock. What are you going to do with it?
Right, exactly. And not always a market for that in a privately held company, which is another good thought to think about early on and making sure that we're starting with the end in mind, even if we're not that person at in the entrepreneur role and we're somebody that's benefiting from these stock options and equity positions over time. And essentially, just to kind of boil it down for our audience, you've got an option that's granted at a certain value. The goal is to grow that to a higher value over time, and then basically trading in on the growth in that stock over the course of time and creating that monetization, often at an exit event or at the sale of the company. But a really, really effective way for especially folks that maybe aren't starting out with a huge bank account to take a little bit of risk and create a ton of leverage in terms of the kind of value they can create for themselves over time. So we talked about end goals. We talked about the goal of selling a company. I know there's a lot of different end goals that people have, that entrepreneurs have in businesses, Amber. So is that the only goal, or are there other goals? And how do you think about what the ultimate goal of starting up and then owning a company is?
For most entrepreneurs, they do want to sell. So I would say that that's the ultimate goal. I mean, I guess the other thing I would say, just to kind of give a preview, like you said, not everyone's going to be a Jeff Bezos necessarily, or an Elon Musk, but it's also not necessarily just about getting to the finish line, selling the company, and then you're out. I mean, the reality is that for entrepreneurs, it's more of a marathon than a sprint. You're not going to sell the company most likely and take off and go sit on a beach somewhere. As you know, Matt, you've sold companies. The buyer, part of what they're looking at is a fantastic entrepreneur, a fantastic founder, the management team that's around that founder. They're going to want those people to stay on and work for them for a number of years. Probably that buyer is looking towards then having a second sale of that asset or that company. You may need to hang around that long for that second sale. Frequently, you don't get all the money up front. You hear, oh, so and so sold their company for $50 million. Well, if you actually look at the fine print, it was 10 million with the possibility of another 40 if you achieve these milestone goals and the technology is synchronized with the acquirer's business or you hit your sales and your revenue targets. So I would just say it's very, very exciting to be an entrepreneur, and it takes some stamina.
Without question. And part of that process, and I have been through that as a matter of fact, and thinking through one of the things I was most proud of after selling companies was, and for that matter, buying them, was looking back after several years and making sure that either the seller of the company that sold their company to us, and to your point, oftentimes there was a fixed cash amount at the front end and then some things that had to happen for them to accomplish and to realize the entire value of the purchase price. And the same thing on the selling side, where you're selling a company to a buyer, was being able to look back 2 or 3 years over your shoulder and say whether you bought somebody's company and made some promises when you bought it, or you sold a company to somebody and made some promises when you sold it, knowing that they accomplished the value as well. And sometimes that takes being involved with that buyer, which, by the way, can be a really different feel when you're used to being an entrepreneur and making every decision. And in my case, in one case, we sold our business to $1 billion company with way more hierarchy and way more, not in a bad way, but just more bureaucracy because it was necessary given the scale of that business. It was a much different feel. And those are the kind of things that entrepreneurs, when they're thinking about that eventual exit, should be considering. Is it so many different aspects of entrepreneurship, of founding a company, of compensation, of capital structure, and so on, that we've covered. Anything we haven't hit on, Amber? I mean, if I'm a young person thinking about my opportunity to found a company, to do a startup, to grow it to what I can ultimately see as the opportunity or the potential of that business, what have we missed?
Anything could be a successful technology and a successful business. It's so, for your students out there or your budding entrepreneurs, don't think you have to have the it technology. Maybe that's not what you're interested in. It's okay. You'll find a route with whatever it is that you're interested in. There are these upticks and trends. And then in terms of someone like me who sees so many deals cross my desk all the time, yes, I could see an uptick, but even when these things trend, they never eclipse the rest of the market. I mean, I wouldn't even say that AI is 10 or 5, even 5, maybe even 3% of my work right now. I mean, yes, it's trendy, and yes, it's in the news, and yes, maybe you're feeling like, oh, if you're not in AI, you're in some class B technology or whatever. I have to do the it thing. You don't. There are all sorts of businesses that are highly successful, from the tangible stuff we talked about at the beginning to components and stuff you can't see and niche little technologies that only a few people understand. There's someone out there that wants that. So I would just say, whatever it is that you have, don't feel like you need to go with the trendiest thing, because there's great opportunities out there for all types of technologies.
As we like to say often on the Tech Ed podcast, a good idea today is better than a perfect idea tomorrow. And if you think you have a good idea that has the potential to create value in a marketplace, and whether that's a new technology, a new way of doing something, a new market that nobody's thought about, get started today and get going. And we've given folks, I think, a really solid playbook, Amber, in terms of what they need to be thinking about, what the process is, demystifying the process, making it a little bit simpler, a little less scary. And you've done just a phenomenal job of doing that. I do have one last question for you before we sign off here on the Tech Ed podcast. And I've actually been really looking forward to posing this question to you, Amber. And we ask it of every guest here on our podcast, and our audience is used to hearing really fantastic answers. And I know yours is going to be terrific. If you had the opportunity to go back in time and to talk to that 15-year-old Amber, what advice would you give that individual if you had the opportunity to do that?
I would say find something to do where you make money while you're sleeping. It's all of the stuff we've just talked about. It's being an entrepreneur, it's launching a business. I mean, I'm somewhat entrepreneurial in the legal field. I'm in a boutique firm. I'm, left that large international blue chip law world. So I'm doing something that's entrepreneurial. But I only get paid for every hour that I work. So I like the direction of all of your students out there who are listening, who are thinking of growing a business and having it be something that scales and that sells and that can make them some money while they sleep.
Find something that you can do that makes money while you're sleeping. I love that advice, Amber. And it's just been such an awesome opportunity to have you on the Tech Ed podcast. I think that's just a perfect bow to put around our discussion around entrepreneurship, around startups, and around really, really successful eventual exits of companies. I can't thank you enough, Amber Busuttil Mullen, for joining us. She's a partner at Bowen Tax Law in Los Angeles. Just a great conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, I hope all of our budding entrepreneurs in Tech Ed podcast land are as excited about the future of the world of startups, about starting up your own company, about being a founder, about being an entrepreneur as I am after that episode with Amber Busuttil Mullen, the partner at Bowen Tax Law. That was just so much fun for me. I've lived that entire experience that she talked about, and I can tell you firsthand that if you have any interest, if there's any spark of entrepreneurship in our listeners, listen to that episode again, take Amber's advice, and get going. I had so much fun on that episode. We also have a lot of fun on social media. Every single week, you'll find us on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. It doesn't stop there. If you're on social media, come find us, make a comment, connect with us. We would love to be connected with you. We also had a ton of resources that were talked about in this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. They are at techedpodcast.com/Amber. That is techedpodcast.com/AMBER. Another terrific episode of the Tech Ed Podcast in the books. We'll see everybody next week.